Okay, dear student, we are going to talk about feminism, feminist criticism. Little bit recap of the previous lecture. The feminism, the belief in social, economic, and political equality of the sexes, although largely originating in the West, feminism is manifested worldwide and is represented by various institutions committed to activity on behalf of women's rights and interests. We have already talked about it, that what does mean the word feminism is. Here we will talk about its criticism one. However, once again, I have told you that it is some sort of equality on the basis of economic, political, social, and lot of opportunities that are just limited to men. Here, women are also working for them. So that's why it's something important just for the rights of women. The equity, and for better, if I can use the word equity, equality, both. Equity is better word because definitely women in the world have been deliberately deprived of, and now through quota system and through a lot of other things they have been given places. Even in you can see in your National Assembly Parliament, it's because of feminist movement that their seats are there won, and they have been given places and positions to work out there in different other organizations too. So, throughout most of the Western history, women were confined to the domestic affairs, home chores, while public life was reserved for men. It has been, and still we can see in our institutions, in our country, in our setup, in our rural areas, especially to some extent, 50% we can see some sort of changes are there. In city life, in urban life, but in rural areas, still the situation is the same one. And here we are concerned right now in this lecture, feminist criticism. Feminist criticism is a form of literary criticism that's based on feminist theories. Broadly, it's understood to be concerned with the politics of feminism and uses feminist principles to critique the male dominated literature. If we can say literature, it has been in the hands of males. Males were controlling, males were writers. So definitely, if we just take example of Shakespearean writer, Shakespearean era, Shakespeare has been very dominant in English, we can say, literature. But in all his plays, woman has no place. She's secondary, rather tertiary one. You can see either it's Lady Macbeth, if you can see it's Ophelia is there, or Gertrude is there, and the list is very long. All these women are suffering in the hands of men. They are forced to live sort of a subsidiary life where they are unable to move freely or to take any decisions like that one. So we can say the famous line that was said by Shakespeare in his play Hamlet, "Frailty, thy name is woman," and Praveen Shaker very beautifully answered it later that vanity, thy name is man. So this is basically feminist critique example that I have given you, I have quoted over here. Feminist criticism roots are in women's social, political, economic, and psychological oppressions by seeking to view women in a new perspective and discover women's contributions to literary history. Feminist criticism actually aims to reinterpret the old text. So this is something important to reconstruct. In other words, to reinterpret that how women were positioned there, how women were presented there, how women were targeted there, and establish the importance of women's rights to save it from being lost or ignored in the male-dominated world. It also seeks to establish female perspective as being of equal importance relative to male perspective. So equality to women were also given there. That was also an important theme that we can see in criticism. And here we are concerned with some of the feminist criticism major concerns. What can be the major concerns? We will talk them one by one. At its core, feminist criticism concerns itself with stereotypical representations of gender. Stereotypical, that's very important, that stereotypes are very common in literature too, that if there's a female, she has this sort of limitation, this sort of problem, this sort of shortcoming, then this sort of activity she is supposed to found. So these are the stereotypes that we people can see in our lives too, in literature too. Thus, although there are many ideas that can be considered through a feminist lens, theory lens I have already used. Actually, it's the lens, the theory. If you, for instance, wearing different colored lens, you can see the world in the same way. So actually, it depends. How do you approach that particular thing? So feminist criticism is primarily concerned with a few ideas and issues that help feminist critics examine gender politics in works, trace the subtle construction of masculinity and femininity, and understand gender politics within literary works. That how this masculinity and femininity is constructed, particularly to achieve certain goals. That is called politics. If you are a woman, you can't do this. If you are a man, it's not your cup of tea. You are a woman, you're supposed to sweep your home. You have to cook something. You have to live within the four walls. So this, according to feminists, it's said that this is basically what they call it, the politics one. It's in reality they say it's all, in other words, in simple word, in one word, if I can say, in they say it's a social construct, so that it's created by men. Men deliberately have created certain notions to make them, to harass them, to keep them, to bind them within four walls. So women's oppression by the patriarchy, male dominant patriarchy, you know one that throughout we can see that this can be very dominant one. Feminist critics argue that women's oppression has gone on for ages in patriarchal cultures. In this view, women's oppression has social, economic, political, and psychological aspects and is tied directly to the tradition system of male dominance at the head of the family. Patriarchal family structure represented in nearly all cultures. Old literary works, we can see that only patriarchal family structures are supposed. Male is responsible, powerful in handling this thing and that one. Finally, decision making, economically controlled, social control, each and everything we can see at the center of that particular man. The view that women are secondary subsidiaries, not primary, that they are not given importance as next to men. So women's oppression has historically been rationalized as being due to supposed to difference in male versus female physical and mental capabilities. In patriarchal cultures, women are often granted few decision-making power and are considered as secondary. Again, this view is seen in many books and literature across culture and society. We can see that throughout in history and literature books and even social decisions, power, decision, all these are the locus of just a person who is male one, powerful one, and mostly the head of the home is male, not female one. And if this the case is there, the males are called henpecked, and lot of other things are there which can show that it's what we can say, what we can argue over here, that it's basically something that's so stereotypical, that the person is not stronger enough and has certain shortcomings, and from all sort of these things are not liked one in male dominant society. Culturally, it is not considered suitable, or socially or patriarchally. So list is very long. So cultural discrimination against women. Women are considered as the feminine counterpart to male masculinity. Some male authors, especially those who produce religious works, position women as the causes of sin and death. The story of Adam and Eve, in which Eve causes the first man and woman's expulsion from the Garden of Eden, is a classic example of the true pain. So, a lot of other examples are also there. One, feminist theories, alignment with the three waves of feminism. If we can see, we have already talked about these three waves of feminism. Feminist criticism has roughly aligned with three waves of feminism. So, they are three rough roads of feminist criticism, each with their own defining characteristics that correspond with each phase of women's overall political emancipation, freedom, and their struggle to gain some sort of liberty that ideally and west they have got their position. So we can see the first wave of feminism, it's men's treatment of women in late 17th to early 19th. The first wave of feminists largely focused on inequalities between the sexes. This is also a wave of feminism that contains the women's suffrage movement led by Susan B. Anthony and Victoria Woodhull. Thus, the first wave of feminism criticism largely focused on how male authors and novelists view and portray women in their works. Critics in this time considered the ways in which novelists discriminate against and marginalize women characters, that how women are marginalized, presented, deliberately positioned, and they're not given importance, they are not at the central place like that one. And it's because male writers were the male ones, so that's why they didn't give importance, they didn't give significance to female characters and their position, that they could not there most of the time align negative things with them instead of assigning certain positive attributes, negative attributes, distortion, problems, and social evils. They all were attributed to women at that era too. So that's where the feminists criticized that sort of work and highlighted that it's not so as it has been pointed out or being written at that time. Some key books from this time are Geoffrey Chaucer's Wife of Bath. Now we can see how she was, and this is similarly Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Mary Ellen's Thinking About Women, and Kate Millett's Sexual Politics. Ellen Millett and German Carrier played an important role in raising question about the practices showing web feminism in both contemporary and canon literature, that how women were presented there. The one Wife of Bath, women has been negatively, very negatively presented there. Now we move towards second wave of feminism, criticism. The second wave of criticism focused on establishing more equal working conditions too, which were necessary in the U.S. during World War II, and bringing women together for feminist political activism. So definitely, after getting some initial success, they move towards the second important thing, that was the working relations, where women should also be given importance. And definitely they were facing problem. Their wages were very low, they were not given the pieces of work which were, they were not considered fit for such pieces of work. But later women started getting those pieces of work too. Now they are commandos too. The feminist criticism during this wave is also called criticism, and it involves major aspects: examination, recognition of female writers' work. Definitely, women's work were brought forth, were given importance, were in the limelight. Consideration of the treatment of women in literary works by both male and female authors, exploring the canon of literature written by female writers in order to understand female writers' contribution in the context of female empowerment, and criticizing the ways women have been treated and mistreated in various cultures. During this time, Simone de Beauvoir and Ellen Scholter established the groundwork for feminist theories and helped them spread more broadly. So that's an important phase where feminism got a lot of importance and spread all over the world there. So we can see their work and her work, literature their own. Scholter proposed three phases of women writing. Feminine phase, women writers try to follow the rules made by male writers, try to avoid debating and questioning women's place in literature, and try to write as men by using male pseudonyms. We can say important, just like uh, many other writers or female writers, they took their names like male, they became male, so in their pen names, and instead of writing their names, a lot of examples and instances can be found. So feminist phase, women writers begin criticizing women's treatment in society and literature, and the oppression of women in society is the main theme of gender criticism in their works. And the next female phase, women writers begin moving from merely providing the woman's perspective to having confidence in their work and assuming that whatever they have written is valid and doesn't need aggressive arguments and support to prove its authenticity. So this is what we people can see there. One, and now we move towards a third wave of feminism, that's 1990s to present. This wave of feminism seeks to resist the received essentialist, overgeneralized, oversimplified ideologies and white, heterosexual, middle class focus of second wave feminism. It borrows from post structural and contemporary race and gender theories to expand on marginalized populations' experiences. Third wave feminists emphasize individual rights as well as acceptance of diversity. The third wave roots are in the Roy Girl feminist punk subculture that began on Olympia, Washington in the early 90s. The subculture began with the purpose of bringing consciousness and politics together through this punk style. And this time, writers such as Alice Walker worked to reconcile feminism with their own minority communities' concerns. Some key works of to understand this wave's feminist criticisms are Deborah MacDowell's New Direction for Black Feminist Criticism, Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, and Lillian's Robinson's Treason Out Text, Feminist Challenges to the Literary Canon, and Camilla Pagila's Sexual Persona, the androgyne in literature and art, Roy Girls and Sarah Dyer's Action Girl newsletter also played important roles in creating an ethnography and style for the design movement for women in this era. So this is how a lot of writers worked and openly supported females in one way or the other way in different subcultures. So, change views towards feminism in the third wave. The third wave feminist authors and critics argue that feminist meaning has changed considerably and needs to to now be viewed with a different perspective. They believe that women need to rise above concerns about equality merely in jobs, education, or family settings. Instead, third wave feminists argue women need to raise their voices for and fight for their rights. Chief Justice Clarence Thomas' appointment to the Supreme Court, despite sexual harassment allegations against him by Anita Hill, was a major tipping point for this movement. For women in the third world, Thomas' appointment illustrated the need for more work for feminism. So, keywords and feminist criticism. There are few keywords and feminist criticism that must to understand in order to follow on many works. Patriarchy, traditional male dominant society, marginalization is basically the process or state of being forced to the edges of social and political significance. So, feminist criticism is applied to literature by examining the characters' portrayals, the text language, the author's attitude, the inter-character relationship. Feminist critics also consider authors' apparent contemporary about society. Some questions that feminist critics may ask include: how is the relationship between men and women portrayed? What are the power relationship between men and women? How are male and female roles defined? What constitutes masculinity and femininity? What does the work reveal about operations, economic, political, social, psychological of patriarchy? What does the work imply about the possibility of sisterhood as a mode of resisting patriarchy? What does the work say about women's creativity? What does the history of the work's reception by public and by the critics tell us about the oppressions of patriarchy? So ultimately, the feminist criticism, like the broader feminist movement itself, asks us to consider the relationship between men and women and their relative roles in society. Much of the feminist criticism reminds us that the men and women's roles in society are often unequal and reflective of particular patriarchal ideology, and these realities are often represented in both the production of literature and literary texts themselves. So, Deborah Appelman, professor of education studies at Charlton College, says feminist theorists ask readers to pay particular attention to the patterns of thought, behavior, values, and power in male female relationships. Feminist literary critics remind us that literary values, conventions, and even the production of literature have themselves been historically shaped by men. They invite us to consider writing by women, both new and forgotten, and ask us to consider viewing familiar literature through a feminist perspective. So, by considering literature and the world around us from a feminist perspective, feminist critics seek to make us more aware of our society's attitudes towards women, especially in cases where current attitudes harm or otherwise marginalize. By recognizing women's values and their contribution to literature and society, feminist criticism seeks to elevate women to their rightful place in society as contributors to and important elements of works and society writ large. So, thank you.